Imagine music, stepping into a bustling Victorian street during rush hour. The sound of the relentless clip-clop of horse hooves on cobblestones. The rattle and thunder of carriage wheels. The crack of a whip from a harried driver urging his team onward. Then a piercing whistle cuts through the den, followed by the slow chuff-chuff of steam. A train is leaving the station nearby, its smoke curling high into the air. For the people of Queen Victoria's Britain, this was the sound of modernity, the heartbeat of an empire on the move. For us, it feels both familiar and strange. A world caught between the old rhythms of the horse and the starving power of steam. In 1837, when the young Victoria first ascended the throne, Britain's transport still belonged to the horse. The stagecoach ruled the highways. Its painted panels and jingling harnesses, symbols of speed and connection. But within decades, railway mania would transform not only how people traveled, but how they lived, worked, and even thought about time itself. The story of Victorian travel is one of breathtaking change, but also one of everyday struggle, of crowded omnibuses, clattering cabs, creaking carriages, and the ever-present smell of horse manure that defined urban life. So how did Victorians get around? And what was it really like to travel through Britain at a time of gas lamps, empire, and industry? Let's take a journey by stagecoach, by train, by omnibus and cab, even by penny farthing into the crowded, chaotic, and sometimes dangerous world of Victorian travel. The open road in the early Victorian period belonged to the stagecoach and was driven by one coachman. Each coach is usually pulled by 4 horses, and horses are changed every 10 to 15 miles. And if you wanted to travel by stagecoach, it's important to reserve a place in advance at a booking office. But the lifeblood of this network were the coaching inns. They were part hotel, part stable, part hub of gossip and local business. And for coaching inns on major routes, there can be as many as 15 or 20 coaches passing through every day. Music, some of the most famous inns like the Bull and Mouth in London had dozens of horses ready at a moment's notice, feeding an army of ostlers, guards, and innkeepers. To ride a stagecoach was to experience both romance and discomfort. Romance in the sense of sweeping through the countryside at a brisk trot. Discomfort because, unless you paid dearly for a seat inside, you were exposed to biting winds, pouring rain, or clouds of dust from the road. And seats were a social ladder in themselves. The coveted box seat beside the coachman was more than just a chair. It was a mark of status and the envy of fellow travelers. Passengers who secured it, sometimes by booking weeks in advance, were treated to conversation with the driver, the occasional chance to hold the reins, and the warmth of his rug and leather apron in winter. As for first-class passengers, they sit inside while cheaper tickets are available for those who perch on the roof and had to cling on as the coach rattled along, often at the mercy of weather and road alike. Nathaniel Hawthorne, the American novelist, once complained after a stagecoach ride in Cumbria that the vehicle was so overloaded he was sure it would topple into a stone wall. Yet for many who hardly traveled more than 30 miles from where they lived, this was adventure, dangerous, thrilling, and wholly unpredictable. When the coach pulls up at an inn, the guard sets a ladder and steadies down those who have been traveling on the roof. And within minutes, the inn's yard bursts into motion. Porters dart back and forth with trunks and luggage. Owslers slip bridles and harness, and fresh horses are let out, snorting in the chill air. Indoors, attendants stand ready to receive you and your fellow travelers. If you're not staying the night, you'll find a coffee room kept aside for passengers. And then there were the mail coaches, faster, leaner, and less forgiving. They thundered through the night, traveled many miles. And their guards would blow brass bugles as they approached each town. To ride on one was to share space with sacks of letters and parcels, and your comfort very much secondary to the Royal Mail's schedule. These mail coaches became symbols of Victorian efficiency, but also of hardship, few breaks, no luxuries, and the risk of accidents on dark, unlit roads. But the dominance of the stagecoach would not last long. As rails stretched across the land, the age of the horse was challenged by the hiss of steam. The coming of the railway was nothing less than revolutionary. This was because in 1830, the fastest stagecoaches only raced along at 9 miles per hour, pushing their horses to exhaustion. Within months of the Liverpool to Manchester railway opening, trains were whisking passengers along at 20 meters an hour. It was more than double the speed, an astonishing acceleration of life itself. And it wasn't just speed. The railways slashed costs. moving people and goods cheaply enough that ordinary workers could travel distances once unthinkable. Yet not everyone welcomed this iron revolution. Farmers feared that sparks would set fields alight or even blind their sheep. Landowners protested about railways cutting across their estates, and entire villages reliant on coach traffic watched in despair as business dried up. John Hollingshead remembered one surveyor, who was dragged into a horse pond by furious coaching men determined to stop the advance of the tracks. As no one really knew the effect what traveling at 15 and 20 meters an hour would have on the human body, anxieties and wild rumors flourished. One medical expert even cautioned passengers against staring too closely at passing scenery, warning that it could strain the eyes and even endanger those prone to an excess of blood to the head. Whatever the reasons for fighting against the railways, it was a losing battle. For example, the Liverpool to Manchester Railway opened in 1830, and in just 5 months, more than 100,000 passengers had traveled on the line. And by 1852, almost every major English town had its own station, and the landscape of Britain was forever altered. The railway also brought with it a new sense of time. This was because clocks in different towns followed local solar time. But trains needed schedules. So by the 1840s, railway time standardized to Greenwich, meantime forced Britain into synchronicity. Even the way people thought about punctuality shifted. A missed train could ruin a day's business. So timekeeping became a national obsession. The experience of travel, however, varied enormously by class. First-class passengers lounged on cushioned seats under dripping oil lamps. Second-class travelers endured cold, drafty compartments, while third-class passengers were herded into wooden wagons open to rain, smoke, and showers of cinders. Still, they came in their thousands. Excursion trains to seaside towns or cities drew vast crowds despite clergy warning of the moral dangers of Sunday outings. By the late century, Bradshaw's Guide, a brick of a timetable, was the essential companion of any traveler, filled with pages of connections, fares, and routes. And when purchasing your ticket, you could pay an extra 3p for insurance should the worst happen. And if you were killed in an accident, your heirs would receive £1,000 in compensation. Luggage, however, was another matter. Unless you paid 6 spins to have it booked in, the railway assumed no responsibility for its safety, and anything over 100 in weight incurred an excess charge of a penny per pound. The sensible traveler therefore kept to a single carpet bag secured with a leather or parchment label, since paper cards were easily lost. In the early days, baggage or guards were stowed on the roof as there were no separate vans for them. This guard, a title carried over from the coaching era, was responsible for operational and safety duties of the train. But over time, the luggage was stored in or on the carriages themselves. As for reserving a seat, only first-class passengers received numbered seats with their tickets. So, if you traveled second or third class, you could not reserve a place in advance, as with the stagecoach. The wisest course was to arrive early, lest you find yourself in a scramble for a vacant compartment. It was also common to buy a newspaper from one of Wythe's railway bookstores. The first was opened at Euston in 1848. But don't forget to buy a folding paper knife at the same time, as newspapers and periodicals are sold uncut until the 1870s. On the platform, the signal bell was the only call to hurry aboard and claim a seat. And choosing wisely mattered because before 1869 there was no way to alert the guard in an emergency. And it was until the 1890s could passengers move between compartments, with corridors and lavatories only appearing in the early 1900s. This isolation of carriages also bred danger. In 1864, banker Thomas Briggs was robbed and murdered in his compartment, the first such crime on an English railway. His killer, Franz Muller, was later hanged. Carriages also invited blackmail with accusations difficult to disprove. So, travelers were advised to avoid compartments with a lone passenger. Although accidents did happen, you can expect your journey to be comparatively safe. Most injuries to passengers happened as a result of them trying to align or board a train while it was still in motion. At your journey's end, a crowd of porters would be waiting to handle luggage. Officially, tipping them was against the bylaws, but in practice it was expected. As Lilias Campbell Davidson observed, these men were underpaid and overworked, yet almost always polite, attentive, and obliging. At major stations, female attendants were also present to assist in care for ladies and children. But railways were not the whole story. In the crowded cities, horse-drawn omnibuses became the arteries of daily life. In reality, omnibuses were a wooden box on wheels drawn by two weary horses and often crammed with sweating, jostling passengers. The first omnibus service in England is believed to have been started in 1824 by John Greenwood, who operated between Salford and Manchester. And in London, the omnibus service was established between Marylebone Street and the Bank of England via King's Cross in 1829. Omnibuses were drawn by a pair of horses and staffed by a driver and a conductor. Straw was scattered on the floor to soak up mud and rain, and often turned damp and foul. Fleas thrived, babies cried, neighbors squashed together, and the air grew stifling. The Penny Illustrated paper once condemned London's omnibuses as foulst drawed. Close and narrow boxes contrived to carry 8 and made to carry 12. And yet for the aspiring middle class, the omnibus was an indispensable, cheap enough to afford and regular enough to rely on. And the very best seat wasn't inside, but up top, known as the knife board. Passengers clambered up narrow steps to sit astride a long raised plank, legs dangling either side. It was breezy, perilous, and hardly ladylike, but at least you could breathe. Later, the garden seat design made upstairs travel a little more dignified, complete with modesty boards to shield women's ankles from view. For shorter, more private trips, the hackney carriage or hansom cab was the vehicle of choice. With its 2 wheels and light frame, it was the sports car of its day. Fast, nimble, and thrilling. Its drivers, perched high behind, controlled doors with levers, ensuring no passenger could slip away without paying. But they were also infamous for overcharging and for rattling their passengers to bits over London's uneven stones. Many crevices let in wind and dust, grumbled one commentator. The seats feel as if stuffed with broken stones. And yet hansom cabs became iconic, forever tied to the image of Victorian London. For the poor, though, options were few. Most walked. Cities teemed with pedestrians, men and women trudging miles each day through mud, soot, and fog. Only with the spread of horse trams, starting in Birkenhead in 1860, did affordable transport arrive for the working class. By the 1890s, electric trams began to appear, signaling another leap forward. And beyond land, rivers and seas offered their own routes. Paddle steamers carried crowds to coastal resorts, bringing the seaside holiday into reach for ordinary families. Pleasure trips by boat became a staple of Victorian leisure, though critics sniffed at the rowdiness they encouraged. Ferry crossings, too, became faster and more dependable. Steam-powered paddle ferries replaced sailboats on rivers and coastal routes, shuttling workers, traders, and holidaymakers across busy waters, turning once lengthy crossings into brief, routine journeys of everyday Victorian travel. Beyond paddle steamers, Britain's canal network also carried travelers, though in humbler fashion. Early canals, once the arteries of the Industrial Revolution, offered some passenger services aboard horse-drawn narrow boats with teams plodding along towpaths pulling long, low barges. Journeys were slow but affordable, and with the rise of engine-driven narrow boats, more journeys were linked to industrial centers and country towns. Eventually, the increase of fast trains prompted the decline and use of narrow boats and canals. For greater distances, Victorians looked to the sea. By the late 19th century, the steamship liner was the fastest way to cross oceans, shrinking weeks of sail into days of steam. One immigrant described the experience as a floating town where the sea vanished beneath the smoke, capturing the awe these great vessels inspired. And then there was the underground. London's first underground, the Metropolitan Railway, opened in 1863, and though many people may think that engineers dug tunnels underground, they didn't. They used a technique called cut and cover, which means the engineers dug a big trench down the street, built the railway at the bottom of the trench, covered it with an arched roof, and then covered it back over and rebuilt the road on top. It also ran steam trains fitted with condensing gear to help curb exhaust fumes in the tunnels. And even though smoke and poor ventilation still drew complaints and official inquiries, the underground offered a radical solution to surface congestion. By the 1890s, a new generation arrived. The City and South London Railway was the world's first deep-level electric tube, with its small carriages nicknamed padded cells. And the Central London Railway followed in 1900 with the famous two-penny tube. Together, they shifted the network from steam to electric and transformed subterranean travel. But perhaps no invention captured the spirit of late Victorian freedom like the bicycle. The penny farthing with its towering front wheel was both marvel and menace, demanding balance and courage. Riders risked serious injury and headers over handlebars. Yet, they embraced the thrill. More practical was the safety bicycle of the 1880s with its chain and equal-sized wheels. Affordable second-hand models gave clerks, servants, and shopgirls a new form of independence. For women, the bicycle was nothing short of revolutionary. It allowed movement beyond strict chaperoning, symbolizing liberation. As one writer famously declared, "The bicycle has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world." By the 1890s, motor vehicles began to make their hesitant debut. At first, they were novelties, noisy contraptions limited by law to 4 meters an hour, led absurdly by a man carrying a red warning flag. But when that restriction was lifted in 1896, a parade of 33 cars drove from London to Brighton, cheered by crowds. It was the beginning of a new age, the horseless age, that would soon sweep away much of the Victorian transport world. Travel in Victorian Britain was never simple. It was noisy, dirty, smelly, and often dangerous. Carriages could overturn, trains could crash, cabs could cheat you, and omnibuses could leave you half suffocated. And yet, it was also exhilarating. For the first time, millions could travel far beyond their birthplace, see new places, take seaside holidays, or simply commute across town. In fact, before trains, most people traveled very short distances from home, with the average person likely never traveling more than 30 meters or 50 kilometers from their birthplace, and many living their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. Movement, once slow and uncertain, became part of everyday life. And with travel, new horizons and opportunities opened for many people. The Victorians lived in a world on the move, where the horse met the locomotive, where the omnibus rattled alongside the underground, where bicycles symbolized freedom, and where the first motorcars hinted at the century to come. Their journeys, crowded, chaotic, but transformative, and laid the foundations of the transport systems we rely on today. And so the next time you step onto a train platform or hail a cab or cycle down a road, think of the Victorians. Their journeys were our beginning. They remind us that every rattling wheel, every puff of steam, every weary horse and ambitious engineer carried Britain into the modern age, an age forever on the move. If you've enjoyed this journey into Victorian travel and love stories of the past, enjoy relevant visuals and appreciate history documentaries, don't forget to like and subscribe to Obscure History today. Music.